Okay, so I think we're gonna get started. Hi, guys. Thank you for coming to the fifth day of our publication panel. Today, we are featuring Pure Nowhere. Born out of San Diego music scene and Melbourne suburbs, Pure Nowhere is an independent publication documenting youth culture in its most honest form. It's the passion project turned career goal that brought co-founders Abby and Kyla together from opposite sides of the world. Thank you guys so much for being here. Feel free to introduce yourselves as well.
Thank you so much for having us. Yeah, so I am the Kyla out of the Abby and Kyla of that duo. I'm currently in Los Angeles, although I am from San Diego, California, and I'm currently a sophomore in college. That's about it. Yeah.
I'm Abby out of Abby and Kyla. I live in Melbourne, Australia, so it's about 7 a.m. here right now, bit of a time difference. I'm 18. I'm not currently in school or anything, but yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. And I'm here with Anna, a lovely co-host. Anna, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Anna. I'm the art director for Unpublished, and I'm currently in New York. It's my third day here, so that's where I'm based at the moment.
Awesome. So feel free to ask questions in the comments, and we'll get started. So, what inspired you both to start your zine?
I think speaking for me personally, because when Abby and I first met, we were both running separate magazines at the time. She had one called Seafoaming, which I'll let her talk a little bit more about. And then I was running a version of Pure Nowhere, which I'd started building in eighth grade and then officially got it my freshman year of high school. But in eighth grade, it didn't really have a purpose. It was like more or less like, when in middle school and you used to like build like the Google sites and they just had all this stuff on it. So it was more like that. And then my freshman year of high school, I went to my first local concert for my 15th birthday. And that was like the turning point of everything. Like I can chart back like who I am now to like that. Cause if I didn't go to that show, I wouldn't have such a passion for music. And it really started out as just a local music blog to highlight some really amazing musicians and some really amazing venues. And yeah, and then Abby and I met on Instagram about maybe like a year and a half after that, and decided to merge our publications together into the Super Pure Nowhere you know now. And I'll let Abby talk a bit more too.
Yeah, so that was like definitely the first inception of what Pure Nowhere was. It was about a year and a half before we met, and during that time, I was running my own blog in Australia called Seafoaming. That was a lot more like culture focused, I guess. So it was focused on art and writing and that kind of thing. And for me, I'd just been really into creative writing for a few years and talking to publishers and stuff. And they were always like, you should like establish a blog, some kind of online presence. And it just kind of grew from there. But I sort of fell in love with the people I was meeting and like the collaborations and the connections you could create through using community that I'd had no idea about. And so that sort of was what drove me for the first couple of years. And then me and Anna just went naturally from that and the merging happened from there.
Yeah. And then I think now the inspiration kind of changes and grows just because I think we found that Pure Nowhere is a lot more fluid than we had initially established it as. Because it is essentially like an extension of ourselves. And I feel like you can't outgrow something that grows with you. You know what I mean? And so we're like constantly having new ideas and finding new means of inspiration. And the people that we work with are definitely like at the moment the number one driving point of like I love these people, like I want to, I guess, just create a platform where we can all sort of put everything that we love into one place.
That's awesome. Could you guys tell us a little bit about kind of the story of how once you got Pure Nowhere started, how you put together like your first issue to get, offline into like the real world?
Yes, this is an Abby question because she was behind a lot of the first issue work. Abby, take it away.
Yeah, so I mean, for both of us, first print issue was like the biggest dream from since we started, I think. And at the time when we met and decided to merge, we were both working on different first issues for our respective platforms. But at the time, Kyla was a year or two ahead of me in school, so things got quite a lot hectic for her. So we sort of put that issue to the side and focused on the one I'd been working on. So that was the one that became our first issue called What Freedom. And it was like 18 months of my life. And I ended up dropping out of high school to focus on it essentially. And it was a long process, but the best thing I've ever done, and probably the thing I'm most proud of. I think it was just like the ability to create everything we'd been creating in a digital form and sort of see if it could work in a print project and see if there was interest in people to buy something that was like bigger and a bit of an investment, and not like your traditional media platforms with advertising and all that kind of thing. Yeah, but it was just a long process. It was just 18 months of emails and spreadsheets and graphics and like a steep learning curve too. We taught ourselves how to use all the software and InDesign and how to go through printing presses and work out international shipping and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, a lot of fun too.
That's amazing. So what is the story behind your guys' name?
Ooh, I can speak a little bit on this because it's changed a lot from like when we first because Pure Nowhere was the original name of my publication. So when we merged, we ended up taking my name instead of Abby's. And I think it's definitely evolved a lot since then. But the very, very first original inspiration was when you're listening to a song kind of in like a subconscious way, and next time you listen to it, you like remember everything from that one specific moment and like all these weird little details, and it sits in like this little place in the back of your head. And so in the very beginning when we were a music blog, our slogan was like, it's where the music takes you, like Pure Nowhere. And so that was sort of the inspiration for that, because I just think that that's one of the most amazing feelings in like the entire world. And then as we merged and started to grow, it became more of like a physical place. I think everybody can relate to this feeling of like restlessness and displacement once you start to, grow up, and once you start to try and, I guess, find a space for yourself that isn't inherently like, I guess, like the space that you were raised into and the space that you were raised into thinking you were going into. You find a bit more of your own home. So then that's when it changed, like Pure Nowhere, for when no physical place feels like home. Because one thing that I think is really special is just because Abby and I are on completely opposite sides of the world. Like Pure Nowhere is the only reason why I'm in college. It's the reason why Abby dropped out of high school. It's like, I guess, a place where we can come together, and it feels like, I don't know, I'm just so close to everybody that works on the publication. And even though we're all super far away and I have not met like probably most of them in real life, it's like a nice little home that we can all bridge to. So that's the current inspiration.
I love that. You kind of touched on this a little bit, like the people you get to work with, but in general, for both of you, what has been like your favorite moment, your favorite like thing about starting this and running it and seeing it grow?
Do you want to go first, Abby? Or do you want me to go first?
I'll go first. I mean, of course it's so hard. There's been incredible like milestones, opportunities and everything, but if it comes down to like a moment, I guess, I think for me it still has to be last year in July, and I flew to San Diego to meet Kyla for the first time after 2 years of friendship or whatever it had been, and lived with her for a month. And I was 16 at the time, and I freaked my mum out quite a lot. And we threw 3 shows between San Diego and LA. So we had one in San Diego, one in LA, and one up in Thousand Oaks with our friends from Kids Next Door Art Collective at the time. And there were moments with Kyla where I was like on a beach in San Diego, and I was like, how am I here? How is this real? How did we start a magazine and now this is happening? But the most important moments were at the shows, especially Art Prom in LA, when there were like 300 kids there and the music was playing and we were dancing and there were vintage stores, and I just could not believe that like what we'd put together and like what had manifested into the physical world, I guess, because we'd spent like 2 years on FaceTime, on Zoom calls, working on websites and trying to figure out time zones, and it's like all online, completely online. And then to be together in person in a place with 300 other people there, it was just, I still have no words to describe that moment. And I think even if we get bigger and we do bigger shows, and we have started doing bigger shows, but nothing's nothing's going to top that. Like I sort of looked around and I was like, oh, this is a real thing. This is actually, it exists. It was wild.
That's amazing. Hopefully we'll get to shows somewhere soon, regarding the pandemic. But moving over to team establishment, how did your team come together?
So our team definitely came together a bit gradually just because we do have a nice mixture of fairly new people that we've added over the original quarantine period, which was like March through July sort of. And then a nice mix of like people who've been with us for quite a while. I think one thing we've like tried to establish a team quite a few times. We've been around for almost 5 years now. And one thing that always happens is, of course, like people come up with priorities in their lives. Like everybody has their own thing to do. And one thing that like, I guess I find very important is just making sure that everybody knows that like, I never want Pure Nowhere work to be stressful or overwhelming or something that you feel like you have to do. So we definitely do have a lot of people who like wax and wane. And so through that, we found like a really nice, like small handful of core people who have been there for like years. And then over quarantine, as we started to get a bit larger, Abby and I were like, okay, like maybe now's the time to give like building a bigger team another shot. And it definitely was. Right now, we currently have around 70 individuals working on our team, everywhere from interns, writers, copy editors, formatters, our wonderful managing web editor, Sydney. And that's absolutely incredible. And so with that, we just sort of, I guess, identified the key areas that we wanted to hit within the company. And it was really good to like make a little flow chart of like who talks to who and like just making sure that every position that you're filling, you have adequate work to give each person. And that you're not just, I guess, bringing people on for the sake of bringing people on, which is something we definitely fell into in the very beginning. And that's where you get people who maybe don't have like that sort of, I guess, unfiltered passion where they love to do it just because they love to do it. You know what I mean? Yeah, so we're definitely still learning on the whole team side of things though. And we've been so lucky where the people we have brought on now are super understanding with the fact that we are pretty much in the same boat as them. We're learning as we go. We're figuring out what works. Yeah, and that's my little tidbit on teams. Do you have anything to add, Abby?
I think you pretty much summed that up perfectly.
Yeah, so that's team.
Do you want to follow up with, Becca, the next question that you had? I feel like it goes well with that.
Yeah. Do you want to?
I can say it. I guess it was kind of just what you were starting to mention, finding people, and in the beginning it's, you want people to join and help you out, but what have you learned has been the most important thing to keep in mind when you do start finding people that you want to join your team?
Ooh, I have something to add, and then I'll give it over to Abby so she can say something too. But I think with at least from personal experience, the most important thing with us is not to rush into things, just because we tend to get very, very excited about sharing this, like brainchild with other people who are equally as passionate. And so we tend to, I guess, sort of like, well, in the beginning, we like gave away positions before even fully knowing like the roles that position had. And then that just creates complications later on and like miscommunication. And of course, everybody's like super understanding, but we've gotten to a point now where I guess we sort of understand the time frame that it takes to build a team, because it can be really exciting and really like new, I guess, to want to bring everybody on immediately and start something that's beautiful, but you have to step back for a minute and think about the logistics, as much as that might not be as exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I think the two biggest things I sort of tried to keep in mind this year that we've learned over the past few years was first to just be like really upfront with what's involved and like the commitment involved. And I think really early on, when we weren't so confident in what we were doing and we weren't so confident that other people might want to like help us out, and so I was really eager to maybe like under talk how much the commitment could be, or try and like make it sound as good as possible to get people interested. And I think this year I sort of tried to focus on just being like a lot more honest and being like, this is the commitment, and like, do you have the time, and if you don't, that's totally okay, but like just being really upfront about, I guess, what was involved, so everyone kind of knew what they were getting into. And also I really enjoyed doing interviews with everyone this year instead. So previously we'd talk to people online via email or Instagram, and then we try and like get a feel for who they were and we'd move from there. But this year we decided to do Zoom interviews for everybody we were thinking about bringing on. And I think that was really helpful because you just get to see a bit more of their energy and more of a personal connection too, which just helps to establish a working relationship and encourages being able to do meetings and that kind of thing. So yeah, those I think those things really helped.
Awesome. And do you guys have any advice for maybe people wanting to start a magazine or smaller magazines looking for more help, like how to get people to join the team?
Oh my gosh, yes. I think that this is a question that has like evolved so much since we first started, because I remember having like this I will always bring up this conversation because it was like, oh my gosh, it was right when Abby and I met. So we both had still been running our separate publications. And like at the time, I guess like running like an online zine wasn't like as popular as it is now. Because now we see all these wonderful like smaller zines popping up and all these people who know about the community. But back then it was pretty much like a small like handful of people were doing this online. I remember having this conversation with Abby and being like, one day making a zine is going to be equivalent to making a YouTube channel, because that was when YouTube was really big. Which I feel like it still kind of is, but I think that's, at the younger side of like our generation. And like, I don't know, I think that right now is the most ideal time to start a zine if you're looking to get into it, just because like that initial group has already sort of, I guess, answered all the questions that you're looking for that you have. And there are so many more like resources on all of our publications. And there are so many, like, I guess, notes you can take from other people, like not only what they did right, but what they did wrong, which is something that like Abby and I try to be very transparent about. Like if somebody asks us a question like what's the biggest mistake you wish you didn't make, we'll like 100% answer that, so you don't have to make that too. And if you're looking for more people to join the team and like just to grow, I think organic growth is really, really important with publications, just because you are building a community that's so passionate about the same things, and that energy really has to be reciprocated. And there can't be, I see someone ask what's the biggest mistake, and there can't be like, I guess, any like miscommunications or anything like that. You know what I mean? Like it's very nice when you talk to somebody and even if you can't fully explain something, they still sort of like understand what you're trying to say. And honestly, just reaching out to your friends and DMing random people on Instagram, like you'd be surprised at the amount of response you can get, because a lot of the people that Abby and I have connected and worked with on Pure Nowhere just came from like finding a really cool post and commenting and being like, I'm so obsessed with this, can we work together?
Yeah, I just deeply agree with everything Kayla said about there being so many resources out there now, and everyone's got guides on how to start a zine, which is just, it's amazing. Like it's being able to just access everything and really see the roads other people have gone down and what you might want to do differently and what you might want to go through as well. And yeah, it's there's so much out there now to answer those questions. It's fantastic.
So following up on like organic growth, we have a question asking, what did you do to help with organic following? What is the best way of promoting?
I have a comment. Okay, so in the beginning of so this is, sorry, stuttering. This is all accredited to All My Friends Zine because they were the ones who tipped us off on this. But honestly, TikTok was probably the best platform we got on as a publication, especially early in quarantine when a lot of people were like, just starting to settle into not having anything to do. And we had just reached 6K at that point when we first made our TikTok. And within 2 weeks to 2.5 weeks, we had gotten up to, I think, 12K on Instagram. We were able to launch our team applications. We got over 500 applications in 3 days. We were planning on keeping it open a full week. And at that point, we're like, there's no way we can go through all of these. Like, we have to close it. And just like the response and the community that you find on that platform is really wonderful, just because the algorithm is so like deeply filtered to each person's interest, that like even I don't know how to use TikTok. I still don't know how to use TikTok all the way, but like honestly, just throw anything up there. The zines that I have seen like make other TikToks as well do really well and get the most amazing support. So that's great. And then also organic following and best way of promotion. I think interacting with the followers that you have is super, super important, and making sure that like you comment and you like and you share, because it's really important to interact with small artists that you believe in, and just like letting them know that you appreciate the work that they make, because people will see like the energy that you put out and they'll reciprocate it as well. Honestly, yeah, interacting with people is like one of the biggest things for that. So that's my little 2 cents.
TikTok definitely spiked huge organic growth for us this year. But for the time period before that, the sort of 3-4 years we were around before that, it was pretty much just primarily Instagram, which was a lot slower. But I think the one thing I will say for that is, even though it took us about that original 4 years to build up to 6K, I think we were at back in April, that community is still so passionate and dedicated and incredible, and I'd say that even if it takes like a really long time to build up that first few thousand followers, and it really does, nothing's gonna match like that first small community, and that like passion, that energy, and that's the people who are really caring about what you're saying and what you're doing, and Instagram's still always going to be my favorite platform just because of that, I think. But yeah.
Wait, can I answer the question about the biggest mistake real quick?
Yeah.
This is important. And this is a mistake that, well, at least I think that this is our biggest mistake. And I'm sure Abby will agree once I explain what it is, because we still actively make this mistake. And if you've noticed, we've been quite a bit like less, I guess, involved on Instagram and within posting. And a lot of the stuff that we've been doing so far has been like per our amazing team who's kept things running. But our biggest mistake that we do is we tend to do sprints instead of miles. And we tend to get into this headspace where it'll be like a month or like 2 months or 3 months where we are just pure nowhere every single day, every single second. Like literally the first like 3 months of quarantine, my sleep schedule was I would wake up at 12 or 1 p.m. and then I would go to sleep at 3 or 4 a.m. because it matched up better with Abby's like Australian time schedule. And that was like my normal thing for like months.
Yeah,
and then like
every second, like I would wake up in the morning, FaceTime Kyla, and then 8 hours straight we'd be on FaceTime, and then she would go to sleep, I would have dinner and go to sleep, and then like that was out for months. That was our schedule.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that we tend to do a lot when we just get very excited about things or very passionate. That's when we were like bringing on the team and starting to get all these new followers from TikTok and being like, we're finally at a place where we can do the things that we've always dreamt of doing. But as a result of that like 3-month bender from like, when did we fall off? We fell off like July. From like July till now, it's just been like very, very difficult, especially as like COVID sort of impacted a lot of like personal situations, and there's just so much going on right now that it's hard to focus on pure nowhere stuff when there's so many like life priorities that have to take precedent. And I think Abby and I just sort of both fell into a place after working so constantly of just like absolute burnout, and that is the worst feeling as a creative, and I'm sure everybody can like relate to that, of like wanting to make art but having no mental, no emotional, no physical energy to actually make it. And that is probably our biggest mistake, and our biggest piece of advice I can give to anybody is like, don't fall into the illusion of like a really amazing, I guess, productive period. I'm trying myself to like throw away the idea of productivity just for the sake of being productive, because it never lasts, and it like you can drag that on for so long if you just pace yourself, and it can be so tempting to want to do everything right then, but don't do it. Don't be like us. We're getting back on the horse, but it took a moment. So that's my rant. Thank you.
No, I feel like I totally get that, especially with COVID in the beginning. It was like, what am I going to do to keep myself busy for like months at a time? And now it's like, oh, my body needs to rest. Like we've been through a lot. Another question. So Bella asked about event planning, which is exactly what we were about to get into. So our first question about events first would be like, what event you guys have hosted. I know you talked a little bit about that, like art parties and art prom that you had last year. So if you can talk about that, and then we can answer Bella's question about process of event planning.
Of course. I definitely think I second everything Abby said about art prom. That event was personally like one of my probably my top favorite that we've ever done. And I'll talk a little bit about like the last show that we did in LA, and Abby can talk a little bit about the last show we did in Melbourne, just because we do events in both places. But the last one we skated by it was like mid to late February, like I'm talking like weeks before everything shut down because of COVID. And it was an immersive art gallery and live concert called Heaven on Earth, where each artist was prompted to sort of, I guess, deconstruct their own personal ideas of heaven, just because there are some challenges with that when it comes to like the actual idea of like, oh, the whole Renaissance period and how that they romanticize that, and then how current artists interpret that. So we had wonderful art installations, and we had several musicians playing. We had live tattoos, and everybody came dressed per theme in like the most beautiful, like heavenly attire. And it was 10 out of 10, the most stressful event I have ever done. I would not do it again, but I think the most important thing to me is that other people have the greatest time. And I was so stressed that I'm not going to lie, I don't remember like the majority of that event. Like people will be like, oh my God, it was so good. And I feel so bad because I'm like, I don't remember seeing you there. And it's like, even though I had like a mental breakdown after that event, it was probably one of the most rewarding as well, just because the response was so positive and so beautiful. And that is like, that is my absolute favorite thing in the world. Like that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So that was a wonderful moment. And Abby, about the Australia ones.
Yeah, and so I think a brief overview too is I think we're at about 10 or 11 shows in total we've thrown now. So we had 3 early on back in 2017 or 2018, I think it was. We did the 3 we did while I was there in LA 2019, I forget, it's 2021, not last year, the year before. And then since then we've had Heaven on Earth, and we had 3 Melbourne shows sort of late 2018 to late 2019 to sort of early 2020. So in Australia, we've done a couple of sort of smaller gigs and like backyard kind of shows. And then right around the same time as Heaven on Earth, right before COVID happened, our last one in Melbourne was an end of summer show. So we hired like a really big hall in my hometown here and had about 5 bands and art on the walls and short film corner and that kind of stuff, and about 300 people, which was a lot of fun. My event planning I don't really have a process. I really wish I had like a concrete like show process. It's just all over the place completely in terms of trying to sort of organize things. But once you like sort of start dipping your toes into booking bands or working with artists, people are just really excited. Everyone's keen to get involved in an in-person show, and so you start to make friends and connections, and people are keen to give you info or teach you things you don't know. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's become my favorite part, I think, of everything we do at the moment, which sucks because COVID. But when we're not in a COVID time period, I think that like in-person connection, nothing really beats it. Print comes very close, but the shows are incredible.
I also forgot to talk about process, because I have a very thorough process, like down to a system now.
You have a real process.
Thank you. Just because like I feel like where Abby is in Australia, people are like a lot more open and welcome to shows. But I guess in my experience, just because everybody like throws shows in San Diego and in LA, it can be like a lot harder to break into the scene there, especially as a booker, just because the booking world is so gate kept by white men. And so it's really, really great because at the moment before quarantine, there were a lot of like amazing small bookers popping up in San Diego and in LA, and just like seeing what everybody creates. I guess for my process getting into it, the hardest part for me was always finding the venue, just because the venue is going to be the most money. It's like the do or die. And venue owners, at least in my experience, I've probably never worked with a good venue owner. The only good venues I've booked at have been like student run, volunteer based sort of venues. Yeah, it's definitely a hard time, especially as like a young person booking events, because people don't really tend to take you seriously. But I guess the biggest piece of advice I can give on that aspect is like, fake it till you make it, man. Like I would tell myself every reasons why my dream job is a venue owner part. Yes, Jade, I love you. Please do this. Oh my God, please make more good venues. But the biggest piece of advice I can give in terms of the actual like professional aspect, the booking, the communicating with the venue owners, all that sort of thing, is like, you are doing something cool as fuck, and you better like make sure that you know that and make sure that other people know that, because especially in the music industry, people will be really quick to take advantage of you, to downgrade like what you're doing, and that's something that can be, you know, a very toxic mindset if you let yourself fall into that. So that is just, yes, believe in yourself is pretty much the execution of that. And I always start out events. Well, I collaborate with one of our curators. V is the wonderful owner of Fever Dream Art Collective, and so for all of our LA shows, we collaborate with them. So V and I will go and we'll make like, we usually come up with a theme. We make like a Pinterest board. We come out with like this huge elaborate story and idea behind the event, and then sort of build everything up around the outsides. Oh, I just hit my microphone. Like the more you talk about something and the more excited you get, the more people are bound to reciprocate that energy. And I always give myself like several months to work on an event, because you have to reason that especially booking is going to be the hardest thing and take the longest time, just because bands managers will like to lead you on. They'll like to be like, yes, of course, we'd love to do it. And then like 2 months into the conversation, they'll be like, never mind. And it's like, did I really just waste 2 months of my time? But I do also love a lot of band managers are sweet sometimes, but there's that issue. And then promotion, always rule out promotion. At least I usually like to give it a month ahead of time, just so you can get a lot of heaviness on it, but with emphasis on the last 2 weeks before the event. And honestly, just building an amazing team around it too. I know that I could like go on and on about my event system, just because that's something that like I'm very passionate about, is like knowing what to do next and being prepared for that sort of thing. If you have any questions about that, like feel free to email us hello@purenowhere.com. I will answer them personally, because I just love talking about that. But I will let more questions come in.
There
Awesome.
is one. Oh, sorry.
No,
Becca,
you
there's
go.
one in the group chat that asks about how you guys finance your events and printing physical versions of the magazine.
I can comment on events, and Abby can comment on the physical versions. For events on my end, at least, I always use my personal money and savings to do all the upfront costs. And then especially as like a smaller booker, not having a lot of money going into it, it's just really important that you make sure that you accurately catalog all of your expenses, all of your like projected expenses as well, because a lot of bands, you won't pay the band until after the event. And so usually until after you count the door money. So it's just all about projecting how many people are going to come, how much you're going to sell tickets by. That's both pre-sale and at the door. And then I always do like my like rule of thumb is I always project my money based on pre-sale prices, since pre-sale is cheaper. So I always assume, even if it's like not an event that's doing super well, I always assume that we're going to sell out at pre-sale, because the worst that can happen is you break even. Best thing that could happen is more people buy at the door and you make above what you think you were going to. But yeah, and definitely starting out, I would book at like volunteer-based venues, and there are some that will do split the door price and not ask for an upfront payment. So that's really amazing if you're getting into it not having money going in. But if you do have a couple $100s to spare, I always do that and then pay myself back last. And we've only had one event where we've had to take some hits to personal funds, but honestly, it's, at least in my opinion, it's 100% worth it for me to have, like, make that space.
Yeah, and I think the differences in culture between Melbourne and LA are so interesting for events, and that really impacts on how we finance them here, which is fairly similar in terms of like the upfront costs and whatnot and the calculations. But like ticket sales are a bit different. Most people buy pre-sale over here, so we'll usually do like a full price pre-sale instead of sort of discounting it versus door, just because for some reason the culture is a little different. People buy tickets earlier on here, which is very helpful for doing your calculations. In terms of the physical version of Pure Nowhere, the way we finance, at that time we had now we have a separate bank account for Pure Nowhere, and we have a bit of money saved up from everything we've done over the last few years, so we can hopefully try and offset upfront costs and use a bit less of our personal savings. But when we were printing the first issue, we decided to do a 500 print run, so it was quite an initial investment, and I think it came up to about 7,000 Australian dollars. And at that time, I was able to, half of that came from my personal savings, and half of it was blessed enough to get a loan from my grandma, so a family member. So I was very, very lucky to be able to finance it in that way, and then slowly pay her off bit by bit over the next year or two as we sold them from there. I think in the end, at the time, we kind of thought 500 print run was a good idea. A year later, I was like, maybe we should have done less. And this was quite huge. And we were very lucky to get the TikTok sort of events happening right at the right time that sort of sold out the rest of our print run, which was crazy. But at that time, before TikTok had happened, I would have said to anyone, maybe don't do quite such a large print run. It was very optimistic of us. And whatever you end up doing, don't sort of just live within, I guess, what money you do have, because we had quite a lot of money tied up in boxes of magazines sitting in my room for a very long time. But yeah, finance however you can, I guess, with the savings and whatnot that you have, and just start. I would say start a bit smaller than we did, because it was quite intense for a while there, money wise.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So moving on to time management, how do you guys balance your school, personal life, and the magazine?
I think that this is definitely something that I put down on the list of things to talk about, not because we're inherently good at it, but because we are inherently bad at it, and we've learned a lot from those mistakes, especially within time management, just because Abby does work a full-time job and I work 2 part-time jobs, and I'm a full-time student in college. So it can be like really overwhelming to balance Pure Nowhere work and to balance personal life. And then that's where somebody asked the biggest mistake. And that's where, doing everything all at once when you have that little tiny span of free time comes in. So I definitely think that with time management, that goes into the pacing yourself, making sure that even though you do have a small period where you're like, I can do this all right now and it'll be great, that you allow yourself time to rest. Because even though you are super passionate about this work, I always reason like, oh, this like Pure Nowhere is more for fun, so technically it is rest. No, it's not. You're lying to yourself. And I do that all the time. And I think it's also just realizing, which is something that Abby and I are trying to do more, is that priorities, I guess, just making sure that you don't stress yourself over the fact that you're not doing your magazine work or your art because you have to dedicate more time to school or to work, to saving money at that moment. Just because, especially in the arts community right now, like nobody's noticing except you, and we tend to get in our heads about that and be like, oh, I feel so bad, like we haven't gotten any articles up, like people are going to be mad, but like everybody's in the exact same boat. And especially right now, it can feel like, I don't know, like things are more or less on pause, so you should be producing more work. But in reality, because so much of like our creative process, I think, is influenced by other people and the interactions you have every day. And since we've been inherently more or less inside ourselves for so many months, that makes like your creative process do a lot of 180s. And while you might not feel that initially, that exhaustion, it does like build up and build up. So the biggest advice I can give for time management is not to be hard on yourself if you don't have it all under control, because nobody does. And those TikTok videos and YouTube videos are lying to you.
This productive day in my life. So I think where you touched on with the creative process and creative inspiration, I think that's so important, because I would, over the last sort of year and a half, would keep noticing, and then I wouldn't do anything about it. But it's like I feel like all my inspiration in terms of creativity comes from the life I'm living, and like the people I'm interacting with and the experiences I'm having in all of this. And especially in times of COVID, obviously that's been really, really hard. But even beforehand, I'm, creating art that's all about being free. And I'm trying to, particularly the first print issue and promoting the first print issue, is all about freedom. And it's all about just being young and life experiences and all that. And I'm like promoting those messages, and then I'm like not letting myself live my life because I'm too stressed about like magazine work. So it's like this catch-22 that's not sort of working. So time management cards, just like not being too hard on yourself, and recognizing it as a passion project, and you need to give yourself breathing space to actually do your best work anyway, and not getting caught up in those sprints we get caught up in that just end in terrible burnout.
I want to get to this question that was in the chat. And it kind of is more on the side of financing that we were just talking about. But they asked, how willing do you guys find that people are to spend money on art? And that sometimes we feel like we underestimate how many people are actually down to support creatives and like young creatives.
I can talk forever on this because because I do a lot of freelance photography and collage work on the side, and I always undercharge or do work for free that I should be getting paid for. The last big job that I did, I spent 12 hours straight working on these collages. Like, I did not know that you could get like, my body hurt, like my muscles were sore, and I didn't do any exercising. I just collaged so hard, which I didn't know is possible. Please don't make fun of me. But I think that one thing that I found is I recently asked somebody, I was like, hey, sorry, I'm collecting my thoughts. I think that it is a difficult balance to make, just because as a small artist, you want to be approachable and you want to be accessible for other people who can't afford, like luxury art sort of thing. But then you also have to acknowledge how much your work is worth and how much of your like emotional and physical time and energy is going into that. And it can be really difficult to find that balance sometimes. But I think for me personally, or for like just in general, you will always be surprised at the amount of people who are willing to support and to pay for your work, because it's so much more meaningful and so much more beautiful. And there's a streamlined process between content and creator when you pay an artist directly and you know exactly where that money is going. And like, I will pay literally as much. I will pay so much on a small creative, and as somebody who does not have a lot of money, feel like just I don't know, it's the best thing being able to buy from small artists, because like as a small artist, you know how much that means. And I think right now with social media, we have unlimited access to people who are sort of like in that same boat and who just want to support you. So that would be one thing, is never worry about how many people will be willing to pay for your work, because chances are it's a lot more. You're underselling yourself on that one. And what was I going to say? Don't undercharge for your work. I'm such a hypocrite saying this because I always undercharge for my work, but I'm trying to learn as well. Yeah, your art is worth a lot more than you're probably selling yourself as. And yeah.
Yeah, the thing about valuing your own work is I constantly I'd be talking about the magazine at like family Christmas lunches, and my aunties and uncles and grandmas are always like you get 16-year-olds to pay $25 for like a printed magazine, and they're just sort of surprised that there's that people are buying it. And it's just like, if you really believe in what you're creating and you really believe it has value and that people are really going to get something out of it, that's like, you're 3/4 of the way there, and that passion is going to seep over and people are going to realize it is worth something and it's going to add value to their life and make them feel things. And they'll buy it. People invest in art if you really believe in it too.
Yeah. I think it's also about, don't get discouraged if you come across people who won't as well, because it's all just about finding the right community of supportive people, because there are definitely some people who obviously like maybe they want to but can't, or just straight up don't want to pay that much, but you will find that happy sweet spot. And yeah, it's definitely more obtainable than you think it is.
Yeah, definitely. So we have a question in the comments saying, do you ever have any people you feature on your zine ask to get paid? How does it work on featuring?
Yeah, so on featuring currently, Pure Nowhere is like a volunteer run platform. We don't really make any steady income, or like enough steady income to be able to pay people. So in terms of features, most of the time people will reach out to us, whether that's through PR manager. And with features, typically sometimes it's like, at least in like the music industry, people will pay to be featured, which we don't have like a lot of people being like, hey, here's $20, write an article about us. But usually it's a lot of people reaching out and be like, hey, I have this really beautiful project. Could you help me promote it? Could we do like an interview or something? And yeah, so there's no monetary transaction within that. Do you have anything to add, Abby, or is that good?
So that was pretty much. We never. It sort of just depends on who reaches out to us or who we're interested in featuring. But not a lot of don't really pay.
That kind of leads into our like interview portion, and you kind of mentioned this already. So like you kind of get contacted by people, but two questions that were: how do you go about contacting someone that you're really interested in for an interview, and then what do you do to prepare for that interview?
Yeah, of course. So usually, well, I have like a nice, I guess like email template I sort of edit for each sort of situation when reaching out to a person, whether that's musician or artist, but just doing the initial like, hey, my name is Kyla. I run this zine. Like, this is what we're about. And I'm like very passionate about your work. And just making sure that like the artist knows that you appreciate what they do. That's just something that I love too, because it's like, you're making something that I love. Let me like actually express like how cool it is. And yeah, sometimes you won't get a response on the first email, and it's always okay to bump that email and be like, hey, just checking in on this. Sometimes you won't get a response at all, but other times you'll be very surprised at the like, I don't know, I've just had some really cool responses from artists that I look up to quite a bit that are super down to work together. So shooting your shot is like never the wrong idea, always the right one.
Always. Definitely the email template is always the best for like, I guess those bigger, more official ones. My favorite's when we just get to like DM people or like comment on the Instagram post and we're like, hey, we think you're really cool. Like, would you want to do an interview or a feature or a gallery or whatever it is? But yeah, there's so many ways to get in contact people, and in the end, Kyla's right, shooting a shot, like most of the time it works perfectly.
Yeah, it only takes one yes to really get things started. So going on to themes and inspiration, where do you guys find inspiration, whether that's for the print or for the website or just in general in your personal lives?
I think it's a strange combination of quite a lot of things in our internal and external worlds. I know that we were talking a bit about inspiration that comes from personal experiences and the people you're seeing and the things that you're doing, but then there's also a lot of inspiration I think that comes from like introspection. At least on my part, I tend to like introspect a little too deeply sometimes, and that leads to late night crises, but it works out when it inspires like a really cool project. Just like tying in our print issues, our first one was What Freedom, which Abby like found the inspiration from a lot of the, I guess, external experiences of her and her friends and what they were going through. And then our next print issue, which is Sounds Like Bedroom Culture, is playing a lot more on that more introspective side of things and like what you create for yourself when you know that no one else will listen, like what you create out of personal catharsis and like what you find out about yourself through that. And I think our aesthetic and like our I guess overall inspiration for that definitely is constantly changing, just like as we grow. I also touched up on how I feel like you can't really outgrow something that grows with you. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that mix of external and internal is definitely the same for me, and introspection, and I think it does evolve and it does change, and you can see as the different projects we move through and the different themes we move through on the site or in our print projects is just, it's all very it is affected by what's going on around us and what we're experiencing and going through, because I feel like I can't throw myself into a creative project unless like I'm feeling all those feelings too. So it's sort of what I guess just what I'm going through and what my friends are going through, and what sort of matters most to me at any one time is what I want to explore through art as well. Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably what inspires most my creative process.
I also have one more note, because I feel like a lot of people can fall into this hole where they're like, we've established ourselves and we look like this and we have to like continue to keep this brand identity like throughout our existence as like an artist, as like a company, as a publication. And that is at least like in a creative sense, maybe like different from an entrepreneurial or a business standpoint, but from a creative sense, don't pigeonhole yourself, because you can put so much unconscious pressure to create art that looks that looks a certain way, and as a result you'll start to realize that everything sort of starts to look exactly the same, and you start to lose quite a bit of your passion. And that's something that you fall into unconsciously quite a bit too. Abby and I do have those periods, and when that happens we tend to completely redo the entire website at like 2 a.m. So sometimes it takes a little bit of exploration, but never feel like you have to put yourself into one box.
Yeah, you need like space to evolve and change, and that space for growth, that is so important, just to feel like you can go in new directions and try new things.
I love that. I guess we're almost wrapping up, but I think something really important to talk about is in line with kind of like this inspiration and kind of how you've been talking about, you started this kind of a while ago now. Like you were really from the get-go, like you guys had both your own versions of a zine and a community. So how has it changed since you started working together, or like since you both started?
Oh my gosh, I definitely think it's changed so much, just because obviously like coming from, at least from my point, like from 8th grade, like freshman year of high school, to now being like a sophomore, almost junior in college, there's definitely a huge shift in like maturity and mindset and like what you want to project out there. And I think that, I guess starting out, I reflect on a lot of our stuff as being quite a bit naive, just because we had like a very like dreamy mindset of things, I guess, and that was okay back then because we were like 15 and 16. But as you start to get older, I guess like you don't necessarily like lose that sense of like dreams and aspirations, but you start to sort of hone it in a way that's more obtainable and more, I don't want to use the word realistic, because I feel like everything that's realistic is just a perception of what's already been done. So I'm not going to say that, but it's more, I guess something you realize that you want because you want it and not because other people have told you to want this thing. You know what I mean? It's like a lot less impressionable, and you start to gain your own voice and gain your own independence, and start to hear a lot of other people's very distinct and individual voices and stories, which I think is something that like we're really lucky to be growing up in an age of technology where I feel like, you know, before you only knew the area, like what was said and repeated back to you. Whereas I feel like on social media, like it can be very toxic, but one of the positive things is you have unlimited access to so many different people and so many different perspectives and experiences. And so like that personal growth is really incredible to witness, especially like through the progression of a publication as you're like projecting like your voice and other people's voices. Just like seeing the diversity of that and the impact of that is really, really beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's so weird to look back at like 4.5 years ago when it was first, and it was just Kyla working on it in San Diego with but I think in terms of growth, it's so interesting for me to be able to look back now at like the first print issue, and there was a time for about, I think probably just about a year after it was released, where I felt like it was the best thing I could have possibly created, and it was the best thing I would ever create, and I couldn't, everything from the graphics to the writing to how it had been put together, I felt like it was the absolute best I could do. And it finally reached a point 6 or so months ago where I was able to look at it and still be really proud of it and love what and be and yeah, love what we've created, but I feel like we could do so much better now. So it's just being able to reach that point where you can look back at your art and you can be like, that was beautiful and I'm still proud of it, but I see how we've grown, I see how we've evolved, I see how our mindsets and our voices have developed more, and what more we could create now. And coming back to that idea of just like giving yourself space to change constantly and not getting stuck into one idea of what your model is or what your platform is or your publication, and trying different things, and hopefully going to try a heap of different things this year, and sort of break out of these conceptions we've had over the last few years of what we have to be as a magazine, and just lots of space for creative freedom and things like that.
That's definitely something we've been thinking about a lot lately, just because like, I don't know, we're going to make some very big changes that I guess are a bit drastic than what we've done previously, and something where like before we're like no, like, why would we do that? We'd never do that. And now it's like, okay, like there are different things and different priorities and different passions. And I guess it's sort of like remolding and taking a new form. And I don't mean to say that to scare anybody. We're still gonna, it'll be fun. But in the very beginning, Pure Nowhere was a music blog. And in a more cynical way, I definitely have lost so much of my passion for music journalism and that sort of thing. And that's something I'd really like to get back, but just like working in that so consistently for like almost 5 years. The music industry can be a very toxic industry sometimes, and it's also a very repetitive one. So that's something that I'm very excited to pause and then fall back in love with, hopefully.
That's awesome. I'm so excited to see all of the changes that happen. And so for our last question, also on the topic of themes and inspiration, how do you develop a niche you guys have? You said you started out as like this music-based publication. So how do you develop a niche and get yours to stand out amongst the others?
I think I'll speak for like 2 seconds on this, then hand it over to Abby. But I think for us, it's definitely something that we've always had in the back of our mind, just because I feel like the things that we want for Pure Nowhere are slightly different than a lot of the publications that are like out there right now. And yet like it still like falls into a very similar category. And so we've been trying to figure out for a long time, I guess, how to translate what we want into more of like a concrete sense of like, now how do we do this sort of situation? And honestly, the biggest thing I can say on that is trial and error, just because I feel like the niche that you want to be in and like what you want to create will, like, while it still falls under like the same umbrella category, it'll change directions in like very, very strange and very unique ways. And just being open to that change, because yeah, trial and error. There are so many trials and errors that we went through in the beginning to get to where we are now. And I feel like, are you really enjoying it if you're not constantly trying something new and like questioning what you have and what you want?
Yeah, in terms of like finding it within yourself where you want to be and what your niche is, for me it's like that feeling in your heart when you're creating something or making something or interviewing a particular person or whatever. If you like really feel that passion, that excitement, like you found your niche. But I think for us also, it's like I find our niche like in our community, if that makes sense, where I don't feel like there's one particular area or category or theme or topic or whatever that we focus on that's our niche, so much so as our community is our niche, in the terms that we have just so many beautiful team members and readers and people on both sides of the world who seem to really get what we're trying to do, and more than anything like are willing to stick with us as we change. Like the thing that constantly surprises us is how absent we can be, or how we can sort of fall off the face of the earth, and they come back and be like, we're making all these changes, and people are still like, yeah, like we love it, like cool, keep going, we trust what you're doing. And so I think we find our niche in the people who like what we do, which is so blessed and so grateful. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. Definitely, as we find like new creatives and new artists that sort of like, I guess, accidentally like join our little community, it definitely changes our like niche a little bit. Because I see both Athena and July in here. Hi friends, they're wonderful artists who inspire us so very much. And it's just like, I don't know, people always ask me like what my preferred medium is as an artist, and I always say curation, because like, yeah, I do collages and I do photos, but when it comes down to it, like the thing that makes me the absolute most like explosion excited is just being like, here is this person's amazing art. Like I want to show this to as many people as possible. And like, how can we like curate this in a way that is just different? You know what I mean? And I feel like that's where the website comes into play. That's something we're going to be working on a lot more in the coming months.
Awesome. Do we have time for one more? Or should we?
Do you guys
There's-
want to answer one more?
Sure, I have no plans.
The last one from Bella in the chat is just, how are you recovering from burnout, and how have you balanced your personal journey with the Pure Nowhere journey?
Ooh, first off, hi Bella. I love you so much. She is one of my friends. I just hit my microphone again. I guess this is something that Abby and I are like currently in the process of working through. And I think I speak for both of us when I say that this is probably the worst burnout we've had so far. And I think it just, at least for me, one thing that helps me a lot is trying to, I guess, get outside myself, because I think when you're experiencing burnout, you have a very like, for lack of a better terms, like you're the center of everything sort of thing, where you're just like, you keep going over these things that are so like, I'm not doing this and I'm not doing that, and people are noticing that I'm not doing this and I'm not doing that sort of thing. And I think it's just realizing that like everybody is going through the exact same thing as you are in various forms and various stages. And they're doing the exact same thing of like, I'm not doing this and people are noticing. And so they're too busy worrying about themselves to worry about you sort of situation. And I think that if we all started to realize that, there would be a lot less pressure when it comes to burnout, just because I've noticed that burnout is one of the things that the art community is the most understanding of.
Awesome.
I think important too, just to that any conversation about creative burnout right now, you can't have with like a conversation about COVID burnout, because they're so intertwined. Like there's so much anxiety and fear, and it's so okay to be burnt out right now, because the world is just it's so insane at the moment. I think in contrast, I've actually find going more internal has really helped me the last few months, in terms of I tend to like overly distract myself externally to sort of move through burnout. It never really works now. Like I reread the Harry Potter series like 4 times over the last few months, because I just could not deal with trying to be creative or anything like that. But going more internal in terms of journaling and spending whole days by myself, like doing nothing, and all that sort of really helped me move through it the last couple of months, and get back to a place where I feel like I can then go internally and then create from that. But more like just being introspective with no pressure to create has really helped me.
Yeah. And in terms of balancing personal journey and pure nowhere journey, I think the honest answer with that is like, we haven't been balancing that. I feel like we have finally, like for a while we felt very, very bad about it, but we've definitely been prioritizing, which is, you should do this, prioritizing personal journey over pure nowhere journey. Just because how can you work on your art if you're not working on yourself, you know?
I want to write that down.
I need to take my own advice here.
Yeah, I'm like, listen to your words.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for hopping on. We had an awesome time talking to you guys.
Thank you so much for having us. This was so much fun.
It was so nice to meet you guys. Thanks for all your advice.
Bye, friends. Thank you, people.